If you say the name James Carville in front of some people, depending on who it is, you'll get one of two reactions. If you say it in front of a Republican, they are much like that line from an old Paul Simon song. They spit on the ground every time his name gets mentioned. But for some Democrats these days, say the name James Carville and they're like another line from that Paul Simon song. They'd like to put him in the house of detention. Well, maybe not all of Carville, but at least his wayward tongue when it comes to talking about Joe Biden's reelection chances. What am I talking about? Hang on, folks. We're going to get into all this in just 1 second. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your front porch conservative. Step on up to my electronic front porch and let's talk. James Carville is any number of things in American politics and cultural life. He is loud, he is boisterous, he is, in the mind of some, obnoxious. Okay, maybe in the mind of many he's obnoxious. But there's one thing that you can say about pundit and political strategist James Carville. He's a winner. The man helped elect Bill Clinton to 2 terms in the 1990s, and his instincts are so refined and so honed he can pick up on something usually before it starts happening. And it's one thing above all else, and even I give it to Carville. He's honest. While I may disagree with his politics, his honesty over the years on most things is refreshing, even from the Democrat side of the aisle. But it's that same trait that I find admirable that's getting him in trouble with his fellow Democrats right now, because it turns out he's preaching heresy in the church. What am I talking about? Take a look at this article from the Messenger. I think you're going to find this to be very, very interesting because it speaks to how much he's gotten himself in Dutch with his fellow brethren. Headline: Dem strategist James Carville says Dems are trying to stop him from talking about Biden's not good poll numbers. The president's numbers are not good and they're not getting any better, said James Carville. In an article written by Kayla Gallagher, we read the following. Prominent Democratic strategist James Carville says that, quote, leading Democrats have been pressing him to stop talking about how President Joe Biden's poll numbers are, quote, not good. Nobody is saying, hey, James, you're wrong, Carville explained, suggesting that while some Democrats agree with him, they find the information upsetting. They're saying, James, you can't say that, he added. Carville referred to the pushback in an interview with The Atlantic about the recent entrance of Minnesota Democratic Representative Dean Phillips into the presidential race. I'm looking at the polling data. I'm looking at all of it, Carville said. The president's numbers are just not good, and they're not getting any better. Phillips faces an uphill battle against an incumbent president, but Carville is keeping an open mind about Phillips' ambitions for the White House. Quote, I talk to a lot of people who do a lot of congressional level polling and state polling, and they're all saying the same thing. There's not an outlier. There's not another opinion. The question is, has the country made up its mind? A major campaign point of the Biden campaign, and one that Democrats have stood behind, is that Biden beat former President Donald Trump in 2020. Therefore, they assume he could do it again in 2024. But Carville isn't buying it, agreeing with Phillips, who told The Atlantic the same thing. Quote, my grave concern is I just don't think President Biden will beat Donald Trump next November, Phillips said. Okay, let's talk about this for a minute. Like I said, you can say a lot of things about Carville and they'd all be equally true. He's loud, he's obnoxious, you may not agree with his politics, you may think he's dead wrong about everything, but when it comes to understanding the mechanics of politics and how to win presidential elections, and more importantly, seeing the trend line, James Carville is one of the undisputed masters of the game, regardless of which side you happen to be on or which side you happen to be for. He's looking at all the same polling everybody else is, and he's coming to the same conclusion. Joe Biden is in deep, deep trouble, whether it be Donald Trump on the other side or another Republican. I would take that one step further and argue that if it's Trump, Joe Biden is definitely in deep, deep trouble for any number of reasons, but we can get to that later. But Carville is trying to warn his fellow Democrats, hey, look, I'm seeing all the polling, I've seen everything, and this is not a good situation to be in, and it's not getting any better. Now, does that necessarily mean Donald Trump beats Joe Biden next November? No idea. Couldn't tell you. Couldn't even guarantee it and wouldn't even want to try. But at least Carville on the Democrat side is seeing what a lot of people on the other side of the fence are seeing. Joe Biden is in trouble. So much trouble, in fact, that a Democrat has jumped in the race against him, a sitting Democrat congressman, which what makes this so interesting. Take a look at this headline from the Washington Post. Dean Phillips' challenge to Biden makes Democrats ask if 80 is too old. The little-known Minnesota congressman hopes to repeat history from 1968, only this time taking on an incumbent president over anxieties about age as opposed to anger about the war. Analysis by Dan Balls. We read the following. A half a century ago, a politician from Minnesota challenged a sitting president for the Democratic presidential nomination. His name was Eugene McCarthy, and the U.S. Senator's candidacy helped drive then-President Lyndon Baines Johnson to the sidelines in 1968. Representative Dean Phillips, Democrat of Minnesota, who on Friday announced his candidacy challenging President Joe Biden for the Democratic presidential nomination, believes and hopes that history can be repeated. McCarthy's candidacy was fueled by anger over the Vietnam War and attracted brigades of young people who flooded New Hampshire for the first-in-the-nation primary and delivered an embarrassment there to Johnson, very nearly defeating the incumbent. Soon after, Johnson announced he would not run for re-election. Phillips is no Gene McCarthy. His candidacy is different. He has no issue like Vietnam to propel his campaign and, frankly, has no real beef with Biden's leadership. He says he loves the president. He applauds Biden's performance and supports his legislative achievements. What he wants is for Biden to step aside now for a younger generation. His candidacy is built on perceived anxiety about Biden's age. The little-known Phillips, 54, elected to Congress in 2018, is a placeholder for the unease about Biden, 80, that exists among many Democrats. Phillips wants Democrats, even voters who like and respect the president, to use him to send a message that Biden should not seek a second term. The risk is that he weakens Biden rather than strengthens the Democratic Party heading into 2024. Phillips is open about his concerns that Biden might not be the strongest Democrat to go into a general election contest against former President Donald Trump, 77, or against a younger and fresher candidate should the Republican primaries produce a surprise. Other Democrats share those fears, but not so openly. The overwhelming percentage of them probably would support Biden in a general election against Trump, but how many younger voters or black and Hispanic men might stay home or even slide to Trump? It's far too early to know that. Okay. Carville's pointing out there's bad numbers out there for Biden. You've now got Dean Phillips who's jumped in, and he's not necessarily jumping in because of policy disagreements with Biden or necessarily how Biden does things in the White House. He just is saying that Biden is too old. Now, the age issue is going to come up in this campaign, and I do agree with commentator Rich Barris on one point. I don't think it's about Biden's age. It's about his cognitive and physical abilities to do a second term. Biden is having trouble right now. And the more Phillips talks about this, the more he's making Democrat voters think, man, can this guy Biden really go a second round with Trump? I don't know. Now, how much is it going to weaken Biden that Phillips has jumped into this race? Who can say? But the fact that he's laser focused on Biden's age is going to start bringing attention to this at some level and in some quarters of the Democratic coalition. And even though Biden will probably win the Democratic nomination to seek re-election, this is going to hurt him in the long run. The degree to which it does it yet is still to be determined. But not all things are Democrat in the news these days. James Carville may be on the outs with his fellow Democrats about Joe Biden, but there are Republicans who are getting out of the presidential race. Take a look at this. Over the weekend, we read the following from NBC News, that Vice President Mike Pence suspends his 2024 presidential bid. The former vice president's campaign never gained traction as he confronted a GOP that has moved beyond the Reagan-era conservatism that he embodied. And Pence is not the only one who's gotten out. Take a look at this from the Associated Press. Radio host Larry Elder ends Republican presidential campaign and endorses Donald Trump. And it goes one step further than just two different candidates getting out of the presidential race on the Republican side. This may be the biggest headline from the weekend. Senator Daines to rest of the GOP field, drop out, coalesce behind Trump for president. In an article written by Breitbart reporter Matthew Boyle, we read the following. National Republican Senatorial Committee Chairman Steve Daines, Republican of Montana, is calling on everyone but former President Trump to drop out of the 2024 GOP presidential primary and coalesce behind Trump. Quote, I was surprised, but I think that's the right move, Daines said when former Vice President Pence dropped out of the race on Saturday at the Republican Jewish Coalition event in Las Vegas, Nevada. Reading a little bit further, because it's clear President Trump is going to be the nominee for Republicans for president, and the sooner we coalesce around him, the better it's going to be. Now, why is Steve Daines doing this? Well, aside from the fact that he's elected Republican senator from Montana and also an influential voice on Capitol Hill, there's one other job that he's got. He's currently the chairman of the National Republican Senate Campaign Committee. Translation, he's trying to get as many Republican senators elected in this cycle as he possibly can. Now, whether Daines agrees with Donald Trump on everything remains to be seen, but at least he's got the political common sense to realize Trump's going to be the nominee, and we better get everybody behind him if I'm going to get the most Republicans elected to the chamber. So I can kind of understand where Daines is coming from in all this. So you've got Carville on the outs with his fellow Democrats. You've got Mike Pence and Larry Elder on the outs with their Republican presidential candidates, meaning out of the race. And you got Steve Daines running the risk of being on the outs with Mitch McConnell. Everybody's on the outs these days. What are we going to do? Or as David Brinkley used to say, what are we to make of all this? Well, the fine fellow in the fedora has a few things to say. Number one, I am not surprised of the criticisms of Joe Biden from inside his own party. I've been saying it for months. I've been reporting on it for months. There's a significant number of Democrats that do not want Joe Biden to be the nominee for president in 2024. And depending on who you talk to, that could range anywhere from 25 upwards of 40%. But Biden's going to get the nomination because of the power of incumbency. And he has the ability to stack the deck in his favor politically. So Biden's going to be the nominee, but he's got enormous weaknesses going in. One of them is a question about his cognitive and physical abilities brought on by age. And now you've got people like Dean Phillips of Minnesota blatantly and openly saying it. And Carville standing over here on the sidelines saying, look, guys, Biden's numbers are not good. For the Republicans, it's quite obvious Donald Trump's going to be the nominee. He was going to be the nominee all along. And now the attrition has started to happen. People are dropping out of the race. I've got a feeling that by December, there might be a handful of people left, Trump and whoever else. Who that remains, yet to be seen. But I'll tell you one thing, folks. It is so much fun watching all this, and I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am. But that's what I've got to say about it. What do you think? As we start to wrap up this video, please do me some favors as always. Number one, if you are not a subscriber to this channel, please do so. Number two, please leave a comment below. I would love to know what you think about all this. Number three, please hit the bell for notifications. I want to make sure that you're always aware when new material, new live streams, and new videos are coming out. Number four, share this video around. And finally, please give me a thumbs up. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your Front Porch Conservative, and I'll see you next time.